Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Kamiljan Akramov. I'm a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome to this webinar. This seminar is on wins and losses at work, employment and adverse incorporation dynamics in the Ghanaian construction sector. Our presenter today is Dr. Serena Masino from University of Westminster in London. And Serena is from University of Westminster School of Organization, Economy and Society. Before joining University of Westminster, she was with the University of Oxford's Department for International Development. And Serena does research on the different issues related to international development. He spent some time consulting different UN agencies, including WIDER and World Food Program. Serena did her PhD from at the University of Manchester, and her first degree is from her home country, Italy, University of Naples. Serena will present for 35 minutes. Then we'll have a discussant. Our discussant today is Dr. Ziad Laparpi from Westminster International University in Tashkent. And so now I would like to invite Dr. Serena Masino to start her presentation. Serena, please.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the introductions and welcome everyone. So I'll be talking today about a 4 to 5 year project as part of which I was in Ghana on a variety of occasions carrying out field work. The work is with two colleagues. You can see the names here. Obviously, they're not joining the presentations, but both of them have collaborated in the project. Screen is not okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to. Okay. So, what's the motivation for this paper? We know that international economic integration in sub-Saharan Africa is ever increasing in different economic sectors and under different guises. However, in spite of this, we know that the region remains a locus for global inequality. It's actually one of the regions with the region with the highest inequality levels. It has overcome Latin America, which had unfortunately held that record for a long time. It is now in Africa. The World Bank, in fact, estimates that by 2030, 9 out of 10 people living in extreme poverty will be found in sub-Saharan Africa. So what is happening there? Why is it that despite global integration, we're seeing still this dismal record? We know that global production networks, and by this we refer to a variety of realities. Global value chains are one of these, but global production network is a bit wider than that. So we're talking about integrated networks of production that have centers of or branches around the world. So we know that incorporation into global production networks, GPNs for short, can provide a variety of opportunities for growth. At the same time, it is controversial whether that growth is necessarily trickling down to the bottom, the so-called bottom of the pyramid. We know that they can create jobs, and we know that there is a trade-off between the quantity of jobs created, often quite large, and the quality of these jobs. We will be focusing specifically on the concept of adverse incorporation. In this sense, we define as adverse incorporation a situation in which workers are included in the production process. So, and by included, we mean obviously that they've gained the job where perhaps they didn't have it, or they have a more stable, a better paid job where they didn't have it. At the same time, in spite of this incorporation, in spite of the fact that economic poverty has perhaps been lessened, their vulnerability is either perpetuated or increased, worsened. This is obviously a negative outcome, and it isn't any more desirable than the situation in which they were before. So they are incorporated, their inclusion is there, but it's adverse. The terms of that incorporation are adverse. So we're going to be focusing on this type of problem. Global economic integration will not reduce inequality until the growth it induces results in the creation of secure employment for the poor. Essentially, we have a problem where growth is happening, but we want to identify who is this happening for. Growth is reducing absolute poverty levels, but it might not be decreasing inequality. Why is that? Who's benefiting from that and who's being only adversely incorporated? There is a vast literature on global production networks and global value chains. This is normally based on case study analysis coming from a variety of both high income, middle income, and low income countries. They typically identify winners and losers. And sometimes the winners and losers actually overlap. This means that certain economic actors, for example, a certain category of workers, win on the one hand and lose on the other. This is precisely the nature of adverse incorporation. They win because they have now a job, but they lose because this job is actually making them more vulnerable than they were in before. Typically, what the global production network literature finds is that regular permanent workers are those that enjoy higher standards of employment pay and higher standards of incorporation into global production networks. These, however, only a very small minority of the total. Why? The reason is because globalization has created a strong pressure to outsourcing, subcontracting, and casualizing the workforce. This isn't just in low-income countries. This isn't just in global production networks. This is something that we see around us. We see it in Britain. We see it in London with the gig economy. We see it with our Deliveroo drivers. We see it everywhere. So globalization has pushed towards the flexibilization of the workforce, both in terms of work patterns, as well as in terms of the organization of work from the point of view of companies. Why do companies do it? Because competition pressures are stronger than ever. So this is their way of organizing in a way that allows them to withstand competition pressures. This is why it happens, essentially. Now, in the global production network literature as we know it, we typically find that these pressures and this type of organization and the fact that adverse incorporation results for a chunk of those workers hinges on the fact that they are vertically integrated. Okay, so think about, so the prime examples of this are the horticultural value chain or the garment production value chains. These are typically featuring global production networks analysis. So think about a big buyers in the north, such as Tesco or Zara, and the way that global value chains is vertically integrated. Because of power dynamics, these big buyers are able to put pressure down the value chain onto small producers in countries such as, for example, Kenya or Morocco, where garments or flowers are being produced, in a way that the small producers are the ones to withstand uncertainty in the markets in the north, changes in prices, and fluctuations in markets. So these power dynamics insulate the big buyers from these pressures and shift these pressures all the way down the value chain until they become the heaviest down at the bottom of the pyramid. So on the small farmers or producers in this case, who do not have power to stand up to this, typically because they're substitutable. Okay, so they're easily substitutable. At the same time, something that coexists in this type of sectors is the influence of consumers, so NGO scrutiny, so think about the Fair Trade Initiative, as well as the existence of global framework agreements. So think about the Rana Plaza disaster and the agreements that were signed after that. So there is a lot of societal and international scrutiny that mitigates the adverse incorporation outcomes that we see due to vertical integration pressures. At the same time, there are sectors that have neither of those and yet end up in the same way. So with the same conditions. And this is the sector on which we are focusing. Okay, so we will be focusing in this presentation and in my work, we have focused on the construction sector. The construction sector isn't vertically integrated, at least not in the way we think about global value chains. It is actually quite embedded, and it doesn't export. So its market, both for the real estate and for civil construction and engineering, its market is local. The materials are sometimes imported from the country of origin, but this isn't in any way through a vertically integrated value chain. So the sector is embedded, not vertically integrated, and it doesn't face, well, virtually none, I would say, presence of consumer scrutiny. There's no international movement campaigning for better working conditions in the construction sector as of now. There isn't any NGO campaigning either. There's no global framework agreement. There's none of that. So all the pressures coming all the pressures for improvement, if there are any, they'll be internal. And this is what we hope to analyze, to examine. We have found some pressures internally for the improvement of the sector, but we've also found they are mostly neglected. We will be adopting a multi-level perspective. And what does that mean? From a methodological point of view, we are combining two different approaches, and this allows us to examine determinants of adverse incorporations of workers at different levels, at the individual level, so from the point of view of the worker, at the company level, from the point of view of the company that hires that worker, and from the point of view of both the sector as a whole, the construction sector as a whole, and the national institutional level. Why the construction sector? As we all know, the so-called infrastructure boom is a reality in sub-Saharan Africa. A variety of African countries are going through urbanization pressures that we haven't seen before. So they need a quick response in terms of infrastructure generation, infrastructure creation. And there is a new involvement of international financiers from a variety of so-called emerging economies, such as India, China, the Gulf states, or Brazil. India and China had actually recently overcome European and North American investors in Ghana. In 2018, they were the top investors out of all investment sectors. This is the employment creation potential of the construction sector in Ghana. So this is data from the Ghana Investment Promotion Center. As you can see, it obviously fluctuates, and Ghana has gone through a political crisis just before and after 2014, so there's a dip. But you can see that both as a percentage of manufacturing jobs as a whole, because the construction sector is included in the manufacturing sector in their accounting, and as a percentage of total jobs overall, you can see that the percentage is actually really high overall. Okay, so we're looking at an average of 30%, but this is sometimes higher than that actually. So there's a very large share of jobs at the national level created by the construction sector on its own. We need to understand how working conditions are being created and how adverse incorporation is being perpetuated in this sector, because the sector is not going anywhere. It's in fact growing its importance. I apologize for the baby screams at the back. Now, so we'll be using mixed methods of analysis, combining a random coefficients model estimation and 304 semi-structured interviews. With the random coefficient model estimation, we have a multi-level setup where we have two levels. We have the individual level, so we have individual level variables, and then we have company level variables. We are trying to explain individual level outcomes with company-related variables in this setup. So in the quantitative setup, we are only trying to explain, so within a nested model, if you wish, so every worker is nested within a company, we are trying to explain individual and company, we are relying on individual and company level factors only. At the qualitative level, we incorporate sectoral and institutional level factors too. We're able to do this through a rather rich data sets that we've collected through various years, and that covers both CEOs of companies, managers, so top, middle, and bottom level managers, workers, skilled professionals, semi-skilled, and unskilled casual laborers. And we also have institutional respondents such as union representatives, such as policymakers, such as academics working for policy institutes. So these are the type of respondents that we have interviewed over this period between 2015 and 2019. Now, what do we find in the data? So this is a result that I tended to find quite striking, not anymore perhaps after 4 years of looking at this data. When you ask workers in the construction sector, who do they prefer to work for? They almost unanimously, for unskilled workers, say that they prefer to work for foreign companies. Skilled workers are also sharing in this optimism, but a little bit less so. We'll see in a minute why. When you ask them why is that, the main factor, so the main concern for them is job stability. What is important for workers, especially for unskilled workers, is the fact that they can go to work every day. They can get paid every day. And they get that with foreign companies, not with domestic contractors. So the fact that there's a lot of employment and it's continuous, the fact that the payment is on time, because these companies don't really have much financial constraint. The fact that the health and safety conditions are better, the fact that overtime and social contributions are paid, there is better equipment and more opportunities to learn. Now, at the individual level, note that wages, the level of wages is not even mentioned. A big chunk of the literature on comparing foreign to the domestic sector focuses on wages, saying the wages are higher in one sector, higher in the other sector. We find that wages are not even mentioned simply because wages, especially for unskilled workers, so they're mostly adversely incorporated, are fairly low across the board. Okay, so they always earn the bottom level, so like the minimum wage, essentially, or just above it. However, what is different is working conditions. Working conditions and stability of employment, so the fact that there is employment to be taken. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the employment is always with the same company, but it means that people can hop from one job to another quite seamlessly through brokers and agencies. Okay. At the same time, we also have to divide. This is just what other studies have found in the horticultural and garment value chains. We find also in the construction sector, even in the absence of any type of vertical integration. We find that unfortunately, much of these gains are concentrated in the hands of skilled professionals, architects, for example, engineers, and semi-skilled electricians, plumbers. The casual workers, so the workers that are often employed on a daily or weekly basis, are often excluded from any type of incorporation into benefits, allowances, and union protection, for example. So they are hired, as I said, through subcontracting arrangements, often without a written contract. This means that they cannot be represented by a union, and they're also excluded from formal training because of this. In technical terms, this means that their economic upgrading, the fact that they found a job, doesn't translate into social upgrading. This means that their potential for furthering their inclusion onto better terms of inclusion isn't guaranteed. If they cannot train themselves to become any better, if they cannot be protected by a union when they get unfairly dismissed, this obviously means that there is no social upgrading. This also translates in widening inequality. So we find that the presence of foreign companies translates into positive outcomes only for the skilled professionals, partly for the semi-skilled, but mostly for the skilled professionals only. The unskilled professionals stay much the same vulnerable as they were before. At the company level, what we find is that it is a practice for companies not to put workers on the payroll. They want to be relying on subcontractors. They do that because the market is very competitive as well as cyclical. We will see in a minute. So these conditions make it a lot more profitable for companies to only hire workers as and when needed through agency brokers. For example, there's a deadline that they need to meet by the end of this month. They'll hire 200 more workers because that needs to be done, but they won't retain them on payroll. They will not guarantee any type of continuous benefits and allowances regimes to them, because they simply cannot. Now, this is somehow mitigated by the longer permanence of some companies. What we find is, if you look at this graph, I know that you can't read this graph from the screen, so I know this isn't terribly clear, but what this is essentially saying is that the longer a foreign company has been in the country, the less the adverse incorporation for workers under a variety of respects. So contracts, so more permanent contracts are granted by companies that have been in the country for longer. More union representation is allowed by companies that have been in the country for longer. This is the same finding that, sorry, I wanted to go back. This is the same finding by Oya and co-authors, who are the only other study that we found in literature who's focusing on the construction sector and working conditions in sub-Saharan Africa, although not in Ghana. So essentially, the fact that a company has been in the country for longer means that it adapts to local conditions in a positive way. So it goes towards meeting more of the workers' needs and providing more guarantees. At the sector level, the main finding is that the construction sector essentially is self-regulates in a cyclical way. So construction projects don't go on forever. A contractor comes in, wins a tender. For example, they're going to build a hospital. Takes them 3 years. At the end of those 3 years, the company is either gone or dormant, unless they win another project. If they win another project, they rehire typically. So this means that precariousness for workers from the workers' point of view is actually normalized in the country, in the sector and in the country. So this means the workers, even when they're permanent, even when they're skilled, when they join a construction company, they know that if this construction company doesn't win another project before the end of the life cycle of that project that they're working for, they'll be unemployed. Okay, this is the nature of the company. For domestic Ghanaian companies, this often means that everyone is laid off, and then some of them are rehired. If there's a project, many of them will just have to go elsewhere. So there are breaks in employment which are quite definite and also quite certain in that domestic sector. In the foreign sector, foreign companies tend to be more able to win, first of all, more than one contract at the same time because they have more capacity, but also to win another project, to be able to win another project before operations have completely ceased. So part of the workers will be able to transition to the other project, not all of them, but part of them. Typically, there'll be a core of permanent workers that are retained. So as you can see here, once again, this concept of gains and losses coexisting in a way, right? Because on the one hand, the fact that a lot more construction is taking place, a lot of migration taking place, a lot of unskilled people joining as sand diggers, as casual laborers, this means that they can be dismissed at any time. Typically, they are hired when the company needs to meet a deadline, then they are dismissed. At the same time, because all these companies are joining the market, they all need to build. It means that they can go from here to there to there. There will always be somewhere where they're needed. But it doesn't, so the underlying conditions are not favorable, but there is work to do. So on the one hand, the presence of foreign companies guarantee them at least some type of work, but they're working without access to any social upgrading. Now, at the institutional level, we found, first of all, unions, especially traditional unions, they cover workers that pay membership fees. So these workers are the regular ones, the permanent ones, the ones that have a contract. Informal workers, by definition, they won't be paying a fee for membership. They don't even have a contract. Now, we found some independent union as well as social enterprise initiatives that try to move in different directions. So we found a new construction union, the split from the traditional one, and tried to incorporate even informal workers, even waiving the fee. So they were going and meeting them and allowing them to sign their membership through WhatsApp. So hiding from employers. So the main problem is fear of dismissal, fear of being reprimanded. And then we found a social enterprise that was trying to train completely unskilled workers to at least become semi-skilled, and then try to match them to employers, almost as if they were working as a job center. At the same time, they were lacking power. First of all, power in the negotiations with the state. The state didn't support these initiatives, neither financially, nor politically. And secondly, among workers, casual workers, by their very nature, because they move from site to site, are quite difficult. Not, I wouldn't say very, but quite difficult to unionize, because they don't form ties with other workers around them. So they have to move. They keep moving. They can't really unionize as easily. Secondly, there's lack of education and information, which also hinders the process. And then there's fear, as I said before. So this works against them, and the state wasn't really there to try and make it any easier for these initiatives to penetrate. From the point of view of the government, the main obstacle really was the fact that the Ghana Labour Act, which was so the current version is actually dating 2003. It has been waiting for a very long time for a reform, which is still overdue. What this does essentially is that it leaves the subcontracting process, the subcontracting control process. It essentially is unregulated. Okay, so companies, main contractors, are allowed to use agencies or smaller companies to subcontract their workers, but the Labour Act doesn't impose any type of duties of care for those workers. So they are essentially regulated entirely by the subcontracting company. The main contractors doesn't have anything to do with it. And the fact that the Labour Act isn't being reformed, it just leaves a situation like that. It just allows companies to carry on in this way. As well as that, there's a lack of enforcement of protective legislation for workers individually. The legislation is there against unfair dismissals, and it is there to avoid the manipulation of the labor law, which happens with probation contracts. So we found that companies, for example, were hiring casual workers on probation, and then ending the probation on all sorts of grounds and rehiring them on probation. They kept on doing that to avoid having to put them on payroll. The legislation to avoid that is there. The legislation to avoid unfair dismissals is also there, but there's no enforcement. So once again, lack of reform and lack of enforcement are the problems at the institutional level. So what we find in the literature, what has been said, is that essentially when the informal sector widens in this way, this is never just by chance. It usually is happening within the space of a complacent government or complacent institutions. It cannot be happening just all by chance. So the point is identifying how is this happening. While on paper unions seem to be taking employers to the National Labour Commission, then in reality there's actually lack of support to enforce regulations that already exist, and to reform and create new regulation that essentially regulates the subcontracting process. Now, so what we find is a type of precariousness and vulnerability which is very specific to the Ghanaian construction sector, probably to construction sectors elsewhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Defined by three main factors. One is the inherent cyclicality of construction operations. This is a precariousness that we do not find to the same extent in other sectors. In other sectors, we have seasonality. Seasonality is different. It's something that we know comes at certain specific times every year. So that is different from the inherent cyclicality. The widespread use of subcontracting, which we do find in other value chains, but in this case, it responds to this cyclical nature So if governments know that construction operations are widening and that they're cyclical in this way, what type of support package can we put in place to make sure that the downward phases of the cyclical pattern are cushioned somehow, at least for workers? And then a lack of institutional protections against subcontracting and labor law manipulation. So what we find is that this is derived in a different way from global value chains elsewhere. So there is no vertical integrations, and there are no mitigating factors from outside or from the international level. What we find is that by interacting the GPNS literature with the labor regime literature, is that we can use these hierarchical levels that we've identified, the individual, company, sectoral, and institutional level factors, to explain what happens, within a hierarchical system, but without vertical integration. So the policy implications are that, as I said before, because of the incredibly large influence and employment creation potential of this sector, we need to be paying attention to how adverse incorporation dynamics are happening or perpetuating themselves. What we don't want is for protectionless development to become the norm and to become the future as well. If we don't set rules and regulations now to invert this trend, this is going to be the future, if it already is the present. And then, so the other thing that we need to bring attention to is what type of reform initiatives we need to support grassroots forces and initiatives that are already happening inside. This isn't a matter of creating something entirely new. There are already forces that are advocating for change, and they know where this change should happen, and they know how to make it happen. But we need a coordination of all these levels. If the institutional level isn't there, companies are not going to be acting on their own. Companies are not going to be able to guarantee a different treatment to workers. I think this is it from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Serena, for very interesting and inspiring presentation. And I think many of the issues you touched upon here are relevant not only to Sub-Saharan Africa, but to Central Asia and Uzbekistan as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think our participants, listeners, will get a lot from this presentation, although it's not specific on Uzbekistan or Central Asia. So we have actually discussed it, and we have also a few questions here. So first, I will invite Dr. Ziadullah Parpiyev to give his remarks about the presentation, about the topic, and then we will continue with the questions and from the audience. Ziadullah, please, floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Akramov. Thank you, Serena, for very interesting and informative presentation. I have not only listened to your presentation, but also I have had the chance to look at your paper in full prior to this presentation. So I know that you haven't presented all results, and then there is a great work behind what you have already presented. So and congratulations on a good paper. I really think this is good paper. Reading your paper and listening to you, I have a couple of questions and suggestions, if you allow me.
Sure.
One thing is what you presented in the very beginning, where this unskilled and skilled workers, they have differences regarding that, whether they want to work for a foreign company. Yes, this slide, yes. Do you prefer to work for foreign companies or domestic companies? So it is quite interesting, this result, because even though the skilled workers, you know, a major part of skilled workers compared to unskilled workers, they want to work for a foreign company, but still it is a small minority. Does it come from the fact that there are not many construction companies in Ghana, foreign-owned construction companies, and so this working for a foreign company, this opportunity is limited? I haven't found that plausible explanation for this, and this is one thing that I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit. And another thing is, your main message seems to be that basically being a good employer pays off, and it pays off in a variety of forms, in the form of, for example, a higher morale, lower turnover, or increased productivity. And also you bring in a very interesting discussion of this adverse incorporation. And then what you have shown in your what, in your words, terrible graph, but it's not terrible if you look into the graph, and basically it shows that there is a clear divergence in the level of incorporation, adversity of incorporation, from very adverse to intermediate, and then to beneficial incorporations. So I just wonder whether your method allows you to distinguish and to calculate statistical significance, and to distinguish whether these differences in the different level of adversity in incorporation is statistically significant, or I don't know. I just wonder, and I would appreciate it very much if you also elaborate on this point. Yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Ziadullah. And Serena, please,
Yeah,
for your response. Yeah.
yes. So let me start with the questions on the differences on why do they want to work for foreign companies. Are there very few foreign companies? No, actually, there are so many. There are very, very many. I mean, we've interviewed 30 companies overall, and they're only a sample. I mean, so there are many, both domestic and foreign contractors. The reason why they want to work for foreign contractors are here. These are the ones that I was listing. These are the reason why they want to work for foreign contractors. These are the things that foreign contractors can guarantee over domestic contractors. What happens typically for domestic contractors in Ghana is that they tend to get the state-sponsored contracts. So, for example, constructing schools, constructing public buildings. So when the government is the client, when the government is the client, that's what I meant to say, there are delays in paying. The way it works in the construction sector in Ghana, but I think this is quite common practice, the company has to anticipate the money. So if you're a small company and you're constrained in terms of cash and capacity, it is quite difficult. It's quite difficult because then you get halfway through the project, you're waiting for the government to pay whatever they should, otherwise you don't have any more capacity to go on. So you try to scrape by and you don't pay workers. So you tell them that as soon as the government money comes in, they'll get paid. So they don't get paid, the work is left undone, the quality also is affected. Workers know that, and that's the reason why they don't want to work for domestic companies. So this is what happens essentially between those two. Then your other question was on the methods. You were asking, I wasn't terribly clear, I have to be honest, on that question. So yes, we are able to find significance. I haven't got the table of results here because it's, I don't think it would have said much to anyone. So that's why I try to use the slopes instead. So at least that's graphically more interesting. But yes, we are able to find that a variety of company level factors are related obviously, I mean, so we're talking about correlation here. We're purely talking about correlation. They are correlated to both skill status and contract level of workers. So we can explain that correlation between company level and individual level factors. We don't go into the sector and national institutional level from the quantitative point of view, simply because at the sector level it would stay constant, so it wouldn't make sense. So we complement that with qualitative narratives. I'm not sure if this answers your questions. I don't know if you wanted to hear something different.
No, thank you. It's clear now. Thank you.
Okay.
So Serena, we have several questions from audience, and would you like one by one, or should I read?
Let's see how complicated they are.
Okay, then let's try one by one. Then
okay.
We have about 15 minutes to finish this. Then, so first, actually, question from Etanesh Asfo from, I believe she's from Westminster International University in Tashkent. Were real findings? What is the gender dynamics in the study?
I can take more than one.
Okay, and the next question is, so did you look if the lack of institutional reform and support is due to lack of government capacity and or other factors such as corruption? Can you address these two questions? Then I will.
Yeah, I will. Okay, so with regards to gender dynamics, unfortunately, there's not very much to say that in that the construction sector is dominated by male workers at both the skill level, semi-skilled and low skill level. More at the low skill level, I mean, found a female casual laborer. So all the manual laborers, like, the sand diggers and so on, they're all male, at least the ones we've interviewed. What we did find is the cleaners at the offices tend to be women. Semi-skilled workers, once again, tend to be like electricians, plumbers, they tend to be all male. However, at the skill level, we did find a smaller percentage of female. So we did find female engineers, female surveyors, female health and safety officers. They are the minority. So gender dynamics aren't really telling us much in this case because the variation is not there. So the lack of government capacity. Yeah, that's a very good point. So in fact, when I talked to government officials, I mean, what they always say to you is that, yes, these are very good points. Like what you found is actually true, but what can we do? We don't have enough capacity. Companies, they come in with, they have conditions, so they impose conditions on us. They want this, this, and this, so they want to be able to do this, this, and this. Otherwise, they won't build the hospital. So if we want the hospital, we have to abide by those conditions, and there's not much we can do. Now, so while on the one hand, when a completely new company is entering the country for the first time, and they want to guarantee favorable treatment for the first 5 years, while I do understand that, we were talking about companies that have been in the country sometimes for 25 years, sometimes for 50 years. They are considered as Ghanaian companies, even though the capital is not. So in that case, that company isn't going to go anywhere. The state negotiates with that company, the company is staying, the company will stay. It isn't likely that they would just, sort of just like set off and leave to a different country anytime soon. There is some leverage there. So it's a mix, I would say. In terms of corruption, this is like a very short anecdote. So when I went for my interviews with policymakers, they at the time thought that I was, I don't know why they thought I was from Britain, probably because my affiliation was with a British university and no one obviously asked me, are you from anywhere else? So I was told that the most corrupt in Ghana are actually the Italians. So I didn't uncover any type of corruption dynamics that affected my results, but I did find that actually a lot of funds were being stolen by the Italian construction companies, apparently. So they have to deal with other people's construction. And I'm Italian, so that's why I'm saying that. So it was quite funny. At the end, I did say, oh, actually, I'm Italian. Yeah.
Okay, a few more questions here. Was this research shared with the Ghanaian government and or agency? The next question is, there are cases
Sorry, Chameleon, I think I didn't get you on that one. Could you repeat that question?
Okay. Was this research shared with the Ghanaian government?
Shared, okay, yeah.
And the second question is, actually, there are cases when foreign countries are actually companies created by influential people with connection. How big important this phenomenon in Ghana? So I think question is, there's some local influential people create the companies as a foreign companies abroad, register abroad, then come back to do the business in the home country, and to get, I guess, a preferential tax treatment.
Yeah. So, okay, so whether this was shared with the Ghanaian government, one of the co-authors is actually, one of my co-authors is actually a researchers in a government policy institute. So this was in partnership with a government policy institute. So the answer to that is obviously yes. Regarding the second question, I'm not sure I found an instance of that specifically. However, what we did see is that, so there's a regulation of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center that states that any foreign company coming into Ghana should build a partnership with a local company first. So that's the requirement for them to invest if they want to get preferential fiscal treatment. Now, what does happen is that foreign investors pretend to be having a partnership. So they pay a local company to say that they are partners. So this legislation is there to protect the transfer of knowledge. So they ask the company to say that they are partners. So there is knowledge sharing happening. But then in fact there isn't. So they just do it because they want the advantageous fiscal treatment. There isn't any real partnership going on. This is quite widespread, but not all cases are like that. In fact, the most competitive companies, they actually do have partnerships. They want to have partnerships. And so we did find instances of the legislation being respected and working properly. I have to say, though, in many other instances, it was just cosmetic. So there was some it's like lack of enforcement as well in that case, I would say.
Okay, next question is about this GPN seems useful to study clusters in other sectors. Central Asia is trying to promote cluster development in agriculture. I'm interested to learn your thought on cluster development implications for employment in agriculture. I am not sure if you can elaborate on this question.
I can try. I mean, obviously, I haven't worked in the agriculture sector at all, so I wouldn't know the specifics also of the Central Asian country that you're referring to. What I can say is that to refer you back to what I was saying on the global value chains dynamics of the horticultural sectors in, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, what is happening is that there's very little leverage the small local producers have. So first of all, they have to join bigger production farms. They can't stand on their own. Unless they're working for a fair trade agent, they can't do that. Okay, so if they're working for Tesco, they all have to work under one big farm, so that essentially the pressure to standardize, so to guarantee the shapes, colors, sizes are all the same, packaging is all the same, to guarantee those standards, small producers can't do it on their own. So it creates a tendency to move away from small hold production and to bigger land management situations. So that's the first tendency that you see in sub-Saharan African countries in the horticultural value chain. Secondly, there's a lot of uncertainty because these small producers are very easily substitutable. If you're not producing runner beans, you're free to go. We'll just go and get someone else. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of pressure. So not always these dynamics are exactly as they had envisaged when they joined the value chain. I'm not sure if this applies, obviously, to the case of Central Asia, unfortunately, but I can see that these are some of the trends that could be relevant, perhaps, to mention.
Yeah, Serena, thank you very much for this remarks. Actually, I think this anonymous attendee is asking this question because in Central Asia, more specifically in Uzbekistan, government is promoting this cluster development in agriculture, and there are a lot of issues, institutional policy, and issues related to corruption and so on. And so I think I see why this question is so important to our participants. And so nevertheless, thank you for your, remarks on this. This is helpful. And I have my own question, actually. I used to work in Ghana before, about 7-8 years ago. And Ghana is, in the global terms, actually, maybe it's not that big country, but Ghana itself is very diverse country. And so you did these interviews in Ghana, in different parts of Ghana, I guess. And so Greater Accra or Kumasi region or Kumasi area is very different from, let's say, northern part of the Ghana. And how widespread were your, the interviews, your projects?
So the majority of the respondents are in Accra. That's because most of the foreign companies locate in Accra for their projects. Not all of them, though. So lately, we found that some of the emerging country investors, they actually moved outside of Accra. So, for example, in Kumasi, the main market, which is the biggest market in the country, is actually bigger than the one in Accra. That was being rebuilt entirely by a Brazilian company. So I have some interviews from that, which is one of the main projects in the country at the minute. I also have interviews from the northern regions, but by all means, I would say like the majority is from Accra. It's also represented, in representative terms, that also makes sense. But yes, I have interviewed also companies outside of the capital.
Okay. Did you see any difference in terms of their responses, or did your findings differ from, let's say, from Accra to Kumasi or northern region?
No, between Accra and Kumasi, no. What I did find, however, in the northern regions, the concern with cyclicality and projects ending without a new project being available were more pressing, because obviously activity is a lot less in the north. So there was a real concern that the moment the project ends, we don't have a job. We don't have nowhere to go after.
Okay, how about diversity in terms of sectors? Yeah, you talk about infrastructure projects, but road projects or construction of schools or construction of some other, the infrastructure sectors. Did you find any diversity in this regard? And so could you elaborate on that a little bit?
You mean in regional terms?
Both in regional terms and also in the country level.
Okay. So in the paper, I am considering the real estate sector, and that one is mostly, actually concentrated in Accra, where the real estate sector is booming. And then infrastructure building, which is both public, private, commercial buildings, as well as civil construction engineering. So it's both like road work, like big road work, hospital construction, as well as commercial premises. So this is the type of variation that I find. As I say, smaller Ghanaian companies, they tended to be focusing on smaller projects, for example, school construction. Big foreign projects tended to be civil engineering, but there were a lot of foreign companies actually in the real estate sector too. because that's where there's a lot of profit to be made, because there are private clients with money. So it's quite profitable for them to go into that.
Okay, yeah. So I think we are almost finished with all the questions, and our time is also, we have a couple of minutes before we finish. And do you have any final remarks, Serena?
No, thanks for the very interesting questions. It was also great to get the chance to present.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Serena, for your time and for your commitment. I know actually University of London is one of the key partners in this seminar series, together with the Westminster International University in Tashkent and International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington, D.C. So I think our participants are enjoying this seminar series. And in the summer series, we focused more on Central Asia. In the fall series, actually, we just made it more global to bring research papers from other regions, so researchers in the region can learn from other experiences, and in terms of methodology, in terms of research findings, and so on. And I think this is very helpful in terms of capacity strengthening, in terms of knowledge exchange, and so on. And so our next seminar will be 1 week from today, next Wednesday. Dr. Shaba Shang from International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington will talk about clusters, actually. And there was question about clusters in agriculture and so on. And I think next week, Dr. Shaba Shang will talk more about this topic. And he is also chair professor at Peking University in China. That's a joint appointment. So with this, I'd like to thank Serena for a very interesting seminar, and
Thank
also our attendees for their time. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, this seminar, and got some new information, new knowledge. And I would like to thank all of you. And so we will see each other virtually next Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah, Ziadullah, thank you very much for your remarks as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.